to another episode of Integrate Yourself. We are your hosts, Allison Pillow and Maya Gottlieb. And you can find me, Allison, at pureenergypdx.com. And you can find Maya at mayagottlieb.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's under Allison Pillow. It's the Integrate Yourself YouTube channel, as well as don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Thank you guys for listening and supporting us. And we appreciate you so much.
Welcome to Integrate Yourself. We're here today with a great guy. He's really amazing in terms of his personality is just radiant with peace. And the way I met him was at an Ember Yoga in Woodstock, Georgia. And he teaches a advanced flow under the umbrella of Universal Yoga. Finding a lot of conversation that we had. A similar conversation was about the nervous system and how the body works and how setting up a sequence is important for how the body activates. And so that is what I would like to talk about. I also would love to talk about his foraging abilities, because on his Instagram account, he has an amazing picture of him and a morel that's the size of his head. And I always believed that Georgia never really grew morels. I thought it was a myth. But he seems to have connections with the universal gods of mushrooms. And so we also have our affiliate with for Stigmatic. And we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about mushrooms too. But we really want to go on the cuff and just let Justin talk about what he wants, because he's got a wealth of information, and we think that you're really interested as our viewers and listeners. So to introduce Justin. Hi, Justin. How are you?
Namaste.
Namaste. Justin,
Yes, ma'am.
What's up with Universal Yoga? Let's hear your knowledge and why Universal Yoga is an amazing yoga for you.
Well, for me in particular, I was looking for a complete system of yoga, and there was a lot of little pockets of lack of information that I kept finding in conversation with other individuals regarding yoga. And people would fill all the spaces with blah, 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 of course. But I could feel that there was some kind of lack of connection with what was being said and the meaning of what was being said. And so it became natural to feel that with a lot of individuals. I was exposed to a couple practitioners of Universal Yoga in particular, and a lot of what they communicated, I could feel a lot of embodiment from them. It was coming from experience, and it was not just things that they were trying to remember from the internet or books that they have read. And it was really profound experience for me to feel someone talking about something that you could tell was coming from actual experience, obviously compared to people always talking about things that are just not really experienced and they're just trying to remember for the most part. So that was one thing I noticed. And then when I started learning the system itself by researching the creator of the system, Andre Lapa, and realizing that his whole website is really his whole book. He has a couple books out and he's working on his third, but for the most part, he encompasses understanding of multiple lineages of practice throughout all of the history of yoga. And he only called it Universal Yoga because when he came to the West, people wanted him to label what he was doing, to in one way or another box it in. And he just kept on replying, I teach yoga. And of course that was not good enough. And so he decided to put universal in front of it because that was the most yoga word to use for anything to explain what he was teaching. So it's kind of like yoga or uni, one version. And his intention was to kind of bring awareness to the fact that yoga should be universal. And if it is not, if it is specialized in any particular way, then it is not yoga, because yoga in essence is integration. And if we're not allowing ourselves to integrate with any particular part of practice and only specialize in another, then in essence, it is not yogic, in his opinion. And I was really drawn by this because when you hear him say this, it feels really electrifying and nice, because he's coming from many years of experience with all the people that Westerners worship to a degree, humans that are worshipped by people. And this is a strange concept for some of us when we talk about it, until you realize that you've been doing it yourself a couple of years, and realize how spooky it is to just give so much power to people that are abusing it and you don't even realize. And he has really interesting stories that you only hear when you're in trainings with him, but they're about his experiences with people like Iyengar and Patabi Joyce, and spending years living amongst them with multiple other individuals from multiple other countries with the intention of training back in the day. And there's all kinds of stories that people have regarding these interesting gurus and how they would teach things and how they would basically execute the teachings of yoga to their students. And then in his practice, he also found some holes, or should I say, like uncertainties in communication with his teachers. When he would ask questions, the answers that they were giving him, he did not feel were valid. And in a lot of cases, they actually just weren't giving him answers at all. They would just tell him to either keep practicing,
easy way out.
Yeah.
or they would basically say, this is what my teacher had taught me. And he would basically say, well, did you not ask why? And he would say, my teacher taught me what his teacher taught him. And he started really scratching the back of his head, getting fearful about the results of how things were going. Are these teachers really teaching the essence of integrated practices within their own evolutionary experience? Or are they just passing down a conversation that's giving them a lot of attention and a lot of power over other individuals? And so he started really trying to ask himself what was going on and why. And in time, you can notice that there's levels of personal affliction, of course, because he spent a lot of time with these people.
Yeah.
And to almost be let down in some ways was hard for him to accept. But when you hear him tell these stories, you can feel like a balance of like acceptance and still hint of like resentment. But that's experience and that's evolution as well. Long story short, all he did was try to find the answers to all the questions that for whatever reason were not being really given back to him from the actual teachers. And just like anyone else, he went to the ones that were considered masters of yoga in the world and spent years with them. And he left both of them, Patabi Joyce and Iyengar, after only a certain amount of time spending privately with both of them. And so bad experiences from both schools led to him traveling to other schools. His teachings and techniques kept evolving basically from teacher to teacher, yogi to yogi, sadhu to sadhu, until he eventually started actually practicing Tibetan Buddhism and falling into a monastery, Karma Lecce Ling, out in Kathmandu. And he's actually, in some way, shape or form, he keeps both worlds completely separate. When he's teaching yoga, he's definitely teaching yoga. And then when he's teaching Tantric Buddhism, he's definitely teaching Tantric Buddhism, but he's not speaking, or he's not mixing, he's not mixing languages together. When he's talking about yoga, there's no Tibetan sneaking through and vice versa. So it's really cool to see those two worlds in his life evolve, become the main reason and teaching of yoga in his life, and also his personal practice. And it just shows to me that it works, the medicine works, because when you see the person still doing it all and still teaching it all with such joyful enthusiasm, it makes you wonder, where's all this energy coming from? And a lot of people get burned out, or they just get stuck on certain sequences or programs that become really repetitive. But in universal yoga, if you pay attention to the school, it's evolving, and it's kind of like the peak of evolution in those regards, because it's all about answering all the questions, and it's all about finding all the answers, because why not? And not leaving any gray areas for any practitioners. And so, long story short, he noticed that most schools of yoga specialize in different practices that awaken different aspects of our being. And in the different schools, they acknowledge our being separated into what we call shells or koshas. A kosha is like a sheath, and Maya is illusion. And so generally they call them the Maya koshas, the sheaths of illusion that create who we are as individuals. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's there's 7. And then in Hindu, there's 5. But really, both schools and multiple schools that honor and recognize all these sheaths, it's in almost every ancient practice and every religion, is specializing in developing one or another of those sheaths. And so you'll notice that there's certain monasteries that only practice yoga in the form of asana, which is the physical shell. They focus on diet, Ayurveda, and basically health and wellness on the physical body. You'll notice there's some schools that primarily focus on Kundalini yoga, and they don't really worry about those things. They probably have expected you to have already spent many years or lifetimes doing all that. And so you're primarily only focusing on pranayamas, mudras, and visualizations, and really nothing physical. Some people, even getting closer to Zen, you just start focusing even less on those kinds of practices and more on just focusing on nothing. You can see that there's definitely a progression. There's a progression, and where all
and
these
some of the
things
laughter is that I take a Zen, like Zen, and when you say nothing, and it sounds like there is actually nothing. Like you really are working on certain things. So it's funny that you said that.
But you can only do it through nothing.
Yes.
It's very paradoxical. I mean, once you get to the tantric practices, it really is like, once you get to finally doing nothing, that's when it all begins. Yeah, and that's the trip, is that it's really hard to do nothing.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
And it's hard because that part of you is saying, no, I'm not nothing. What are you doing? Like, you got to do something. Yeah. So that was awesome. I mean, just to give an introduction, I know it can get pretty lengthy and everything is connected in such a way, but you are going to finish. I know you are. But we got to breathe. And Allison is here.
So it's okay.
We'll just monitor how much time goes by.
No, I think this is great. Awesome. This is information a lot of people don't really get. So let's keep going. Yeah.
So go ahead. You are on number 3, right? Or is that number 4?
Well, so basically what he did is he combined practices of all the koshas into one system. And so he's basically, universal yoga is just acknowledging all the koshas all the time and making sure that you're always acknowledging the practices that balance each kosha. For example, asanas for the body, also diet, and awareness of diet and awareness of your activities, awareness of control of the senses, and then moving on to awareness of the breath, and then moving on to awareness of the thoughts. Obviously, when we do these things, they create results. Results of working on the physical leads to making it easier to focus on the breath. Results of focusing on the breath make it easier to focus on the thoughts because we're starting to control things more and more. And then obviously results of focusing on the thoughts results in the changing of patterns in our actions. And the changing of patterns in our actions over time is the only way that we can change our karma. And yoga, the intention of humans and our understanding of traditional yogis and yoginis, the mission is to evolve. And so you're using all systems into one system to do what is necessary, mainly because each individual obviously is at a different path of a different part of the path. And so we have in previous lives developed more so one or another aspect of ourselves. And so to embrace all practices equally and in a balanced fashion, there's no way any of us can avoid development. Yeah. And his idea is that if we just fall into specialized practices, generally we fall into the practices that we favor the most, and we neglect the ones that are harder for us to develop. In his opinion, yogis should always develop the weaker parts of ourselves. in order to evolve, which is the harder thing to do. I mean, it's pretty obvious. We're in one way or fashion making a living off of basically making things easier on ourselves instead of vice versa. I'm not saying that's silly to do, but I am definitely saying that we should be weary of our own evolution and knowing that with pain comes growth. And if we avoid pain, then we're avoiding growth in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying causing pain in a violent way. We follow all the rules of yoga, and ahimsa is one of the first. So it's basically not using yoga to avoid the problems of life, but using yoga to integrate our consciousness with the problems and making every aspect of our life completely workable, right, and not avoiding any of it. That's it.
Yeah. And it's important because ahimsa, as I know it, is really about not doing harm to self and first. And a lot of this whole idea of comfort, making everything easy on yourself, we've kind of leaned away from being okay with the discomfort. And Allison's, done a lot of work with Katie Bowman, and she talks about, finding ways to, stack your life, making sure that you're, walking a little bit more distance from, like, if you park your car to a store, really finding ways to get your exercise within the day. We talked to other people in this, interviews about, really changing up your life, that your habits aren't making you so comfortable that you are forgetting that you need the discomfort. You need to lean into it because there is discomfort. And, there's a lot of, self-help books and stuff like that tell you, like, if you're not, you're really pushing your way from the idea that when pain does come, or when things get out of whack, you don't really know how to manage your life. And it's very important to be okay with discomfort. It doesn't mean you have to like it.
Well, or at least bolster yourself, a little bit to manage the stress of the pain or whatever you have to kind of go through,
Well, it's funny because, like I said, people go to these practices like they're running to the next outlet, the next runaway. And really, it's what I love about Tibetan Buddhists is that they're like rocks. And you run up to them, you're like, let's do something that it leads to enlightenment. And they're like, oh, you want to get rid of your suffering. And it's like, the joke is like, enjoy it.
Yeah. Because that's
the thing.
this whole idea that, I'm going to get to some goal and it's going to alleviate my pain is like this illusion, because you really got to find out that you have to go through the pain and you have to be near it. You have to be closer to that point of pain than you've ever been, and be okay with saying, I have the tools to manage.
And it's funny because yoga practices are just really pushing you further and further. I mean, the first part is enjoying it. The second part is having more awareness of, like, what's going on for others. So you can be more accessible and helpful for others. And then, like, it's like anywhere where your mind gets locked, you use that as a way to open up more. Like, where are you on the planet in this moment? What time of day? What part of the year? So it's like you're not escaping at all. You're actually forcing yourself to be more and more and more present, which is not fun.
Yeah.
It's not easy for a lot of people because everything is an escape and everything's a distraction.
That's even with the complicated positions, the asanas, as you get good at it and you start to get better at holding yourself, it's really because you need more stimulation to keep your mind on yourself. Whereas, like, if you're struggling in a simple pose and you have to really concentrate on your breath, then that's enough stimulant you need. Whereas if you've been doing yoga for a long time, it's like you're so proficient that you now have to do more just to get to that one beginner spot. Yes. So it's interesting to see the dichotomy, because most people think, oh, once I can do all these headstands and flips and turns and whatever, it doesn't get better. It just means you have to more stimulant to your nervous system.
I'll tell you one thing. I've met more people that can put their legs behind their head that are crazier than ones that can't.
Yeah. Well, I find that you always have to go back to the basics, no matter what. no matter where you go, like how fancy you get, you always have to go back to basics. I mean, it's always serving for you. You know, it's not like it's never, you never like, oh, I don't need that anymore. You always need
Well,
it, you
this
know?
is the thing that we need to be careful about. And it's because when we get in our heads and we think that, well, I'm it or I'm there because I can do full splits or leg behind the head or handstands whenever I want, that's when something takes you out completely. And that's the thing, is that if we're not mindful and humble, really, then we forget that, you know, things are still moving and we still need to be focused. And really, almost there's not any text that you can read, if anyone that practices yoga actually reads text anymore, that says that it's about the physical. It's never about the physical. And that's just a means to get somewhere else. And no one's asking, you know, where is that? And some people, you can see that they're restless and they're like ready to ask the question, but they don't want to ask the question because they're really cozy. It's like when you get proficient in certain yogic techniques, and this is happening in the West a lot, it makes you a professional asshole or a professional alcoholic or a professional this or that, because you become sneakier, but like you're way better at it all. You're not getting caught, and even though we're all being spied on anyway, but it doesn't matter. The thing is that really what you want to do, is enhance your previous negative karma? In reality, traditional yoga practitioners are trying to either completely transcend it or just purify it. And by purifying it, it means literally changing it. And most people are not changing it. Like I said, it's like the previous karma on speed.
Well, Justin, do you mean like ego when you're saying that? Like you're just kind of, you're amplifying the ego in some way? When are you talking
Well,
about with the example you used with the person being an asshole? Like
no,
I don't.
'cause I don't want to associate the ego with asshole, because the ego is there, you
Yes,
know,
of course,
and
yeah,
it's
but
not bad or good or bad or bad or good,
right.
because it's like asking a real lama, you know, how are you doing? He'll say, not good, not bad.
Yeah.
There's nothing
Right.
there.
But if you're a real lama, you'll be like, oh, well, you're not good, not bad is good. So there's polarity there. Need more practice. And
So
so
you're saying
really,
like to have no polarity.
complete detachment from the ideas that it's not like you're destroying the ego or supporting the ego. You're just
Yeah. You're fine
detached.
either way. Like your external environment doesn't necessarily affect your well-being or your state of being, is what you're saying. It sounds
A
like.
lot of people are using the ego being the bad guy as an excuse to keep feeding the us against them syndrome, which is
Right.
not yoga, you know.
Yeah.
And that puts us in a position of thinking that there is a bad guy. There's something we definitely need to do about this. And long story short, how are you going to be able to rest and meditate like that?
Right. And I feel like that's very similar to what Maya and I talk about with food. Like if you don't have that foundation of blood sugar regulation, like you can't go anywhere from there. There's no way you can find a state of balance. You know,
Absolutely. You got
you're
to
not going
start
to
from the
handle
ground up.
stress. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that also reminds me of like this idea of people, you know, getting rid of their ego was a real fad. You know, everyone was like,
Yeah,
"Oh, I'm
Maya
gonna
and
get
I
rid of
have
my ego," and I'm like, "Wait, no, you need your ego. You need to know how
we
to
were
calm
very
it free."
Don't
confused
let
by
go my
that. Do you
ego.
remember all the confusion around that, Maya,
Yeah,
with our teaching? We were like, wait a minute, what? I don't understand. Like, how do you do
yeah,
that?
and
Yeah.
it's
And really what you guys were saying is true. It's more about mindfulness. Mindfulness is
Yeah.
key. It's not about getting rid of anything. There's no bad guys.
no,
Right.
You know,
Right.
there's nothing wrong that we can do because everything's teaching us something. And so if we give that space to everyone else, you know how fast they would heal.
oh my
I
God,
mean,
yeah.
if we keep reflecting how the negativity of the negative on them, we're basically justifying their negativity and giving them more fire to work with. But if we just sit there staring almost silly, they won't know what to do with us. I love John Lennon's quote, you know, powers don't know what to do when you're just silly. And when you're completely detached, it gives you that bubbly sense of like, it's okay. And there's nothing but space. The only thing is sometimes we forget that there's a lot of space.
And I like to add, like,
Yeah.
a lot of people think some people like to think detachment is like a passiveness, like, oh, I don't care. I'm
That's
I'm
another
all zen.
problem.
Yeah. And there's the problem is that you're not, you can't be detached of everything because you have preferences when you're in this body. Like you have a preference of whether or not someone's going to do something to you in a way that might harm you.
See,
Or this is a problem when people really think detachment is solving all your problems. It doesn't. It actually brings in another aspect of, are you passive or aggressive? Which side are you going to play on? And then you can act like you're not in, but then sometimes you show off a different kind of a personality that comes through, right?
Think about this. Don't you ever wonder why in the past, because there used to be universities of yoga and meditation back in the day before it also became basically at par with politics. But before then, it was pretty much like Buddhism reigned. Everyone was like, had the opportunity to go to all these different universities. But if you look at the techniques and practices of yoga and the understandings of all this knowledge, this is like basically how people learn how to write, how to read, how to learn a lot of ways to communicate with each other. It was like if you want to be intellectual and raise yourself above the low class, which is really just choosing to be ignorant by not learning how to communicate with others, then you would go along with these practices and these teachings. But everything was shared orally and by order. And so a lot of people didn't just have access to what the teachings of detachment or the teachings of this or the teachings of that until they were developed to that point and taught orally one by one what they mean by this. And so now you have this like access to information where everyone can read everything and misunderstand everything and just act like they know it because they read it and not
sounds like the internet.
Well, that's what we're experiencing right now, I think, on a mass scale. It's
everybody's got misinformation, misknowledge, and these are actually two really huge aspects in yoga. It's huge. You have to understand that there is two different kinds of knowledge, and one is incorrect.
One's experimental too. Like you have to have your exponential knowing of what has been going on in your experience. So like, and that's, I think we talked with one of our other guests about how you have to take your own experience and not rush it. There is a path of knowing at your pace at what you learn and what you need to kind of address in your timely intuitiveness, I guess. And some part of you has to listen to that side of you that says, this is where I need to go right now, even though I don't understand why.
That was our interview with on the Girls Skill podcast when we were guests there. We were talking, that was the bulk of the conversation. It was really great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's kind of what you keep bringing back to us in a more yogic terms, whereas
it was oral. So everything had to be, you wouldn't have learned the word detachment unless it was through experience from your teacher, literally. I mean, we're always experiencing these things, but the teacher is like, well, that's what detachment is. We don't have that connection now. Everyone's just on their own, and they want to be on their own, and that's how they want us to be too. And it's a scary place because it's lonely, and you think that, well, you're on your own. How could you be with so many humans and so much life around us? And how could it be like so detached?
And it's not going to get any better with virtual reality stuff that's coming out. We were talking, actually, my husband and I were talking to isn't it? Their production companies, they're doing movies and stuff. And we had a conversation about how the virtual reality glasses and things that they will create is literally like you can make your own world. I want to be in, let's say I want to be in Justin's world, right? I pay a membership to be in Justin's world.
Oh, there's a movie about that's out right now, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Matrix. It's kind of like what you start to realize, like you've paid into something so that you could be like the popular group, or you could be working in something where you wanted a certain type of adventure, so, and it's a kind of a symbolism of like maybe what we're doing in just our body beings right now, but we can't take that conceptually in. I couldn't do much about that, but if you really have a container where I see a virtual reality goggles and I put them on and I watch a whole movie, but I'm in the movie now. Like I'm literally in the movie, but I can take myself out. Like I can't take myself out of my movie right now, but you start doing that. Super.
Well, in essence, that's what our body is too. And so our body is the virtual reality glasses on our soul.
That's a nice, I like that.
And really what's going on is that whenever you're not meditating, you're watching TV and eating potato chips.
I like that.
This is why it's so important to be mindful, because really we already are in virtual reality. We already are. So all they're doing with technology is fractaling that out even more. And so it's just, and it eventually will become just like the Matrix, because it's the only direction it can go in. There's no reason why it wouldn't. And life is endless, and the universe loves to see the potential of things. And so it can get freaky quick.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually is trying to find the name of that movie. That it's a recent one that I went with to see with my kids. And it's literally about what we're talking about virtual reality, and everybody in the world is in virtual reality. That's all people ever do.
It's like trailers stacked on top of each other.
Yes. What's the name of that? Do you know?
Video game movie.
Yeah, pretty much. I can't remember the name, but and I can't find it either because it must be like out of the theater.
But it's really psychedelic to see that, and it's funny
it's
because
crazy.
they make it look so cool. Like,
yeah.
You want to get in there.
It seemed a little depressing, though. It seemed really kind of
for us, because we see the world that they're living in before they get into virtual reality, and we're like, oh gosh.
So maybe we should talk about a little bit of that, because I would actually like to know, how would you help someone who's touching on to that fear? Like that, there's a little fear in this knowing self, and there's a little bit of fear of like, okay, this idea is that we're actually seeing ourselves unfold in front of ourselves, but we really don't have that ability to, we say if you don't meditate at all, right? You don't have even a concept of that. What would you say to someone to help them deal with that fear?
Well, honestly, the best thing is nothing, in my opinion, because unless they're coming to you, it's like casting pearls of swine.
Okay.
What are they going to do with information they're not even seeking?
Yeah. Well, let's say they're seeking. Let's go in that direction.
Yeah, I like that one. What about it?
What would you say? What would you say if someone's seeking?
I would probably still say nothing, because you want to see if they really do want to know. And if they do stick around long enough, then it's pretty obvious that they understand that no matter where they go, it's going to include suffering. And no matter what they do, it's going to include suffering. It takes a long time to realize that. A lot of people just keep forgetting, their own body for the most part. Most people have no connection with their own body. And so it takes a lot of experience to be tapped in. Unfortunately, a lot of suffering, a lot of problems. So usually this will probably be someone who's probably broken their back or their neck or something. They've really been embodied by force. I would probably just continue communicating with them about their life, but it can only evolve in a human way, and it looks different for each person. And so it would depend on where they are. It's basically the psychology of the chakras. It would depend on like where their thoughts are abiding the most. Fear of security, fear of relationship stability, fear of all these things. And then you just hone in on whatever it is, if that's what they're seeking for healing. And all you do is just keep asking why until they realize they don't know why. That's the reality, because all we're doing is trying to remember the space that we're all floating in. And we get stuck on thinking that it's only these inanimate objects, and we're limited. Even though it's so funny, it's like we think it's only the material, but we're also so disconnected with the material.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I have a story for you guys with that, Justin. When you mentioned the space that we're floating in, I just recently went to Mexico, and we went to this place we went to a cenotes. I know there's many cenotes, but here there was a particular one that was near.
You mean cenotes or?
No, it's pronounced cenotes, and it's a spring mineral water pool, and then it kind of flows. There's like a path of water you can go down, and there's like, basically you're in the jungle, so there's just trees all along it. So we're just, it's beautiful, it's clear. And actually they said, don't get near the end of it, because you could be sucked through the tunnel and come out into the ocean. So I was like, I'll make sure I don't get close to that area, because I don't want to be sucked through that vortex. They just had it roped off. It was a little rope you could barely see. I was like, okay.
Don't
So
go there.
just don't go over there. That's all they said. And so, so we had life jackets on. There was 10 of us, and then 3 of us had gone up a little bit ahead. And I was just thinking, oh, this is cool. This is so great. No big deal. And we went ahead of everybody, and then we're going down the path, and we're just swimming along. And these people that are in front of us it was a family. It was a dad and 2 kids, and they were from Mexico, and they were snorkeling. So you can snorkel too, and they're looking under the water. And the dad comes up, he said, crocodillo, crocodillo. And they start swimming the other way. And I was like, what? Like, what do I do? I couldn't really go anywhere because now he's under the water. And then I was like, okay, where is he? And then he comes up out of the water, and you can see him. And I don't want to cross his path to go back. So I'm kind of just stuck there. And and my the other yoga instructor, one of the yoga instructors, was there next to me, and he grabbed my hand, and we're sitting there holding hands, just waiting to see what happens. And so the crocodile starts coming towards us, starts swimming towards us, and there's nothing you can do. You're just like, well, I hope. Of course I'm freaking out, but I'm just like, I hope I don't die today.
Crocodile.
Yeah, it's this surreal feeling. It's like there's absolutely nothing you can do. And so he just goes by, and you could see him. He's just like, yeah, whatever. And he just keeps going. He goes right past us to the other side. Guys. Yeah, exactly.
He's just those dark
like the police.
And I was like,
I'm joking.
And so I'm like, okay, this is a little too much for me. Like, I thought this was going to be a relaxing experience, and I've got to get out of the water now. So I started swimming back, and then all of a sudden we go back down a little ways, and I hear this big splash in the water, and like somebody on a stand-up paddleboard was like, crocodillo, crocodillo. And I was like, yeah, I know. I'm just going to keep going this time. I'm going to just get out of the water. And, but the guy, our tour guide, right? Our tour guide was French, and he had been living in Mexico for 30 years. And I said, why didn't you tell me there's a crocodile living over here, in the water? And the cenotes over here. And he's like, well, would you have gotten in the water if I told you that? I was like, no.
Yeah.
But, obviously, I mean, I guess people get in the water there all the time with that crocodile there. But, that's a very uncomfortable place to be, and it was, and in that moment, I was like, wow, like, I think I'm okay with everything now. I think I can handle most anything now after I've been in the water with a crocodile, that's, I can say that was a first for me. But, when you have moments like that where you're like, and I can imagine with people having near-death experiences, after things like that, you're like, okay, well, that's, nothing else can possibly bother you after that, I would think, because, you've kind of been through the worst. And so that reminds me of, with our talk with suffering, like once you've been through the worst of the worst, then it's a little bit of a bolster to go through things in life, right?
It gets worse than that. I mean, if you spend the rest of your life talking about the worst, that's the worst of the worst of the worst, because
I guess it could have been worse.
Because
you can be really creative. You can start creating more worse. Huh?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that we can use the experience to transcend it, or we can use it to be stuck in it.
Yeah.
So, for example, some people use fearful experiences to live in fear for longer, just as much as they use those fearful experiences to transcend fear and feel more comfortable. Like, it gives them reason not to ever walk into any body of water. And so it can go different directions, but it really is, that really does say, if you're ready to practice yoga or not. And by yoga, I mean, like, start working on yourself, because really working on yourself is looking inside yourself for all that and trying to work on it. It's basically like grandma resurrected inside you, making sure you don't ever leave anything behind. Everything better be squeaky clean, and you don't go to sleep until all the work is done. Actually, don't go to sleep at all, because why? You should be making sure everything's perfect. And that's the deal, is that yogis are trying to perfect themselves, not harvesting any negativity, not harvesting any of the negative qualities of the mind, which we have lists of them, and we have corresponding positive ones that go with that. And there's actual science to looking in your brain and finding whatever is there to clean it. And basically it's just occupy. You fill up your battery with different things. We usually are given all kinds of experience, and then we're talking about that experience. We're holding on to experience, and it's just experience. It's cool, but all of it has different vibrations, and most of it's between the first three chakras. And this is why a lot of different people say, like, oh, Westerners, they're down there.
Oh, okay. Because we're
The
holding
first
it
three
all in
chakras.
here. Yeah.
Well, because we're all just regurgitating experiences without transcendence. And most of us are not living in the heart chakra or have any of it developed because we're not very generous. And our communication is really strong, but it's usually all going through our manipura, our third chakra, which is just like we're only communicating our passions and our desires, which is really negative, actually. And so we're just perpetuating all this heaviness. I don't want to call it anything that seems negative, because it's generally what's going to be what fuels evolution upwards anyway. So it's all good. But in essence, you just keep accumulating experiences until you get so embarrassed by it that you're just like, okay, let's just sit down and see, why am I scared of this, or why am I fearful of this, or why can't I do this, or why can't I do that? And this is really like really why, not like I want to be, no, like why can't I do it? I want to know what's going on there. And we can figure it out, but it takes a lot of time doing nothing. Mainly because if you think about music and sound, like you could, go to a concert, and you, at the end of the concert, it's like you hear the damn speakers in your brain for 2 days, because it's so, like if you're close up front. And that's the reality. Everything that we think and say has a certain vibration, and depending on the strength of that depends on how long those waves linger in our pond. And so it takes a lot of time of silence for the waves to all finally just ripple out. But this is not just any silence. This is like embodied silence. You have to be awake, aware, not just trancing out, not closing your eyes and daydreaming. You have to be like in this space. This is why they do it with their eyes open, because you don't want to be and think of the time you're in Hawaii or the time you're in Africa, because that's basically you're flipping channels on the TV, eating potato chips again. And we don't want to be doing that anymore. We want to be aware of what's going on in this moment, in the boring, ordinary moment of now, because it is boring and it is ordinary. And guess what? That's where realization is. And we're distracting ourselves with the commercials of our past events, the advertisements of our past desires, and the advertisements of our past history. Whether it's negative or positive, it doesn't matter. As long as we're holding on to it, we're not holding on to the space that exists in us. And it's only the space that exists inside us that can accept others, can accept ourselves, can love others, can love ourselves. And so it's really, like I said, it's paradoxical, because people are looking for all these techniques to get closer to the space, but it's the techniques that keep them from the space. You got to stop. And it's hard, because this is what I was saying to Maya about what I would reply is, it's like, you don't want to keep feeding them more tasks to get conceptually stuck on, because then they're just going to be creating another pattern that's going to keep them from really just figuring out what's going on with them. They'll cover up what's going on with them with the spiritual practice. And I got spiritual rights of why I'm covering this up now. And so now people are they'll get, lamas will never say no to you. You can go from lama to teacher getting blessings. But like, you can do that without really getting the results from those blessings, the results from the practices. You can go to a monastery and you can do 100,000 prostrations. You can do 100,000 recitations of everything that's required to get, the label of lama. But whether or not those practices actually worked for you and allowed you to develop awareness in your body, in your life, and eventually change your karma to transcendence, then and this is another thing, is that only you can know whether those things are happening. Unless you're dealing with someone who's got those results as well, because they can see it in you. And it's usually in your eyes is how they're able to see it, because the waves reflect themselves through your being. And if you have no waves, then there's nothing moving. And so the clarity of the eyes is usually what people see. And when you go to the east, I haven't been yet, but they say that basically they look for the quality in people, usually in the Himalayas and in India, through the eyes. You know, ignorant people look through the quality through material possession, et cetera, but they're looking at your eyes. How steady your eyes are has everything to do with where your thoughts are, and where your attention is, there is your wallet and your life. So
that's awesome, because it kind of reminds me of things that we've learned in terms of like being addicted to your stories, not able to rewrite your story, because you're so used to one story. And it made a lot more impact in knowing that, you know, even though like you said, it's hard to give someone tasks to do because they might get addicted to them.
It's all they do.
I do find that somewhere there has to have a stair step, you know, so if that task can help them get to another level, because the tools are necessary. I find that if you don't have enough tools to feel like you can manage the overwhelming part of you, because you're not really in that space of like, hey, you know, I don't have all the answers, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Where are you going?
Sorry, I was organizing the laptop. Really wrinkling down here. I was trying to clear the waves.
Yeah. So anyways,
that's why they have so many practices, and that's why there is so many, because once you finalize one, you go on to the next, and until you finalize one, a real teacher will let you know if you have or not. A false teacher will just give you the next practice. A real teacher will be like, oh, you did 100,000, but if they see that you're not actually thinking about what you're doing while you're doing it, or he'll just say, do another 100,000, do another, and he'll keep telling you that until you basically say, you know, why am I not showing the results I need? Then he'll be like, basically you have to ask the questions. It has to come from you 100%. If you don't ask questions, they won't even answer. Real lamas, Andre even will say, like, he'll be like, what's better, for me to speak in Sanskrit while I read the mantras or to speak in my own language? And he says, well, of course, speak in the language that you understand them in, so that you can develop the meaning and the connection in your living body of what these mean. And he said, but why didn't you tell that to everybody else? He's like, because they didn't ask. And so you have all these other people just doing things over and over and over again without any connection to what it is, and they're not developing it just because they're not even questioning it.
Yeah, they're not curious about it. Yeah. I think that's really important.
And so it is not about not giving them new tasks. It's about making sure that when you do give them things to do, that you also make sure they're fully aware that it is very impermanent, and that there is no end to the practices, and there is no end to evolution. You know, Jesus, Buddha, they were like, as far as we've gotten in our recorded yuga, there's been previous yugas, and they have actually built infrastructures we still can't rebuild. So maybe they were way more advanced. Maybe the regular human was a Buddha or a Jesus, and then there was more advanced humans. Who knows? But the long story short is that the potential is completely endless, and no one knows what we're capable of, which is really magical, because anything can happen at any time. So I like the Zen aspect. You can learn it in 3 lifetimes or 3 seconds.
Yeah. So a lot of this kind of reminds me of nature, and I'm going to segue us into your passion for fungal, you know, passions of mushrooms, and what exactly got you into that, besides maybe yoga teaching you to be
It wasn't my teacher. He would say, ooh, you smoking mushrooms, no good. He doesn't get out much when it comes to food. So when someone says mushrooms, he just thinks psychedelic and probably smoking them or something. He's like a grandpa who never heard about it or never tried it. So.
Well, we're talking about the edible ones at the moment, but like the morels. Tell us a little bit about those.
So these guys actually used to be Martin Luther King's favorite mushroom to eat.
Really?
And before he was assassinated, my friend told me this recently, that they had a morel hot sauce prepared for his lunch. And so they did like a reunion some other sous chefs in Atlanta for a dish on MLK, and they used a lot of the actual fresh morels that we picked in the woods that we found out in Kennesaw, and made that hot sauce again for the whole community of Atlanta, which is really sweet.
Which is interesting because I read a book when I was taking a Vipassana course, and talks about the death of Buddha and whether he ate meat or he ate a mushroom. And the dilemma on that conversation is what is basically an interpretation of what a mushroom is and what a mushroom can provide. You know, we as you know, practitioners of health may know that, you know, mushrooms do a wonderful thing of antibacterial, antifungal, helps with cancer, helps with all
Liver
different
function,
things. Neurodevelopment, everything. And there's a real big, you know, matrix of itself that grows in the on the planet, which, you know, has its own internet. And basically we find that it's very helpful for gut repair, and it helps remove some issues for most people in terms of GI stress and stuff. So talk a little bit about why you like mushrooms and why you like morels.
Well, I'll tell you right now, Mycelium Running is a really good book.
All right.
And just like most things that seem to just fractal outwards and symbolize this or another, it was kind of just that. Once I started learning about how plants communicate through a book called Plant Spirit Shamanism, there was entering more of like the shamanic aspect of how they're communicating to plants through dreams. And then it kind of led to more of Paul Stamets aspects of mycelium running and how the plants communicate amongst themselves on the actual earth. And he's talking about the mycelium in the planet being basically like the phone wires or the phone line wiring for how plants communicate to one another and distribute nutrients accordingly. So basically, if there's certain plants that are going to be attacked by certain insects or actually just deficient in one nutrient or another throughout a particular part of the season, that through the mycelium, they can transfer nutrients from overabundant plants to support the underdeveloped ones during those times, or just literally send signals that warn those plants about bugs that are attacking them in another region, so that those plants can actually retrieve most of their energy to the roots without being affected by the by the bugs on the leaves or stems. And so there's all kinds of really awesome findings that they're having there. And obviously living in the Southeast is just a really huge blessing, or just being raised in the Southeast is a huge blessing. When I was 17 years old, I saw pictures of my friends climbing rocks. And I was like, holy cow, there's like something else to do. It is not baseball or football. And so I went to school and was a bunch of rednecks. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. And they're really sweet people, but it's very limiting on what people were just doing. And so when I saw people climbing rocks, I immediately told them, I was like, take me where you go. And they showed me the different spots. And then I met a man. He seemed like a man at the time. He was also 17.
He just had more knowledge.
So much experience. He moved from California when we were in high school, and he had a lot more exposure to nature because his parents were rock climbers. And so he was just comfortable already to just go hours away to different places that I didn't even know about. So basically, I got to learn all the different national parks and just areas of climbing that not even tourists knew about at the time. It's definitely developed now because climbing has become so huge, and there's books about all the different regions. But long story short, the reasoning is that I was exposed to nature. I was exposed to parts of nature where there was not that much light pollution or sound pollution. And there, the mushrooms grow bigger and the bugs as well. And it's really fun to like experience all these different aspects of nature outside. That inevitably evolved to me getting injured from overexertion of climbing, and that inevitably evolved to me looking towards things to nourish myself and maintain my desire to be a strong rock climber. And eventually I inherited Tibetan 5 rights yoga practice, and then eventually I inherited different ideas and understandings of diet and nutrition. And by the time I was 20, I was practicing a lot of that stuff and just focusing on a lot of that stuff while living out of my van, traveling around, climbing rocks as like my full-time deal. And so foraging was just something that was natural because everyone's hungry. And I was seeing all these mushrooms everywhere, and I was like, man, they like started to look juicy after a while.
When you don't have a budget, yeah.
And it's really incredible because, like I said, when you don't have a budget, you can walk in the woods around here, even just a couple miles, and find 20 pounds of chanterelles. It's a lot of food.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and my son, he talks about that way of living and how he wants to do that when he moves out. And he's a climber too. And he talks about the dirt bag life. He calls it the dirt bag life.
There's only one left in the world that we know about. But dirt bags, it's so funny. There's a whole culture of people that look up to them like gods.
Yeah, I know.
They
right?
definitely fit the name.
Yeah, they do.
The happy homeless is what I call them.
Yeah, right.
I was like, are you sure about that? Yeah. So,
It's not easy. We've watched some documentaries of people really showing the truth about living in a van. It is not
It's not fun. It doesn't.
I learned a lot. Yeah. It actually, I will tell you right now, that whether your son knows this or not, he will find out. And he'll probably say, yeah, it was great. But it was great.
Thank God it's over.
Is also hiding the thank God it's over. But what I'm trying to say is that it really fast forwarded a lot of things for me. It was kind of like a couple years, or some people would say a couple lifetimes of experience in a few years, mainly because I got to see what it was like feeling like a king, and then very clearly realize what it was like not being a king, and very quickly. And the thing is that we're always suffering, but Westerners have a really tricky way of hiding that. And when you make decisions like that, it's hard to avoid. And so when we're coming back to living mindfully, I can't tell you how much that helped my spiritual awareness development and just development of awareness of humans, other people, just life. The fact that there's a whole culture of people that don't have houses and don't live in houses actually in this country.
Especially
it's actually
out here.
Multiple cultures.
Yeah. You see it a lot in Portland, and
it's crazy.
There's people living in tents like on the sidewalk or all over the place, really. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. Over here, it's actually condensed to certain climbing spots, national parks, and Walmart parking lots.
Oh.
But it's there. And we see a lot of people from other countries. We see a lot of people, but unless you're one of them, you don't see them. You don't even know they're there in the Southeast, or maybe closer to the Northeast. But once you're in the more condensed cities, it's unavoidable to see. But even more so until you're actually living it and experiencing it, it's unavoidable. But only until then, you'll never know. And so awareness of life is huge, and most people live many lives not seeing it and having it. And so it's either by choice or by force. You're either like choose to spontaneously, like some youthful or maybe like middle-age crisis, or like about to die crisis, where you're just like, I want to do something crazy and just throw myself out there.
Right.
Or nature does it, or just life does it, situations, you lose someone or you lose parts of yourself. I mean, things happen and will happen. And that's what Buddha was trying to say, is like, I'm sorry that I talk about suffering all the time. Because a lot of people were really like,
they're like, oh my God.
I like what you're saying about the suffering, but like, come on, is there anything else?
You're such a downer.
Yeah, the party pooper, really, come on.
And it still is till this day, like people only want to hear the aspects of Buddhism that are not talking about how shitty life is.
I think that comes from the words that we misinterpret, like liberation, transcendence.
And
Well, and I
detachment.
also think about focus, like, isn't there to some extent what you focus on kind of is what you get back to? So if you focus on suffering, I mean, I feel like there is,
That's what I was saying before.
yeah,
All we're doing is regurgitating information of our past events that suck,
right,
of
right.
our memories and people that we claim suck. Long story short, also, this is really important to understand. When we're thinking about other people, even when they're being negative, even when they're being tyrants, in that mindset, then we're inheriting those qualities. We're coddling those qualities, and we're definitely not supporting the liberation of those qualities in the other individual. And so yoga is about keeping your mouth shut if what you see is negative and you can't transcend it to positive conversation. And it's not about, because a lot of people, like I said, they become super assholes. And when they practice yoga and become more confident or more knowledgeable, long story short, they become quicker to hurt others or quicker to judge others or quicker to really just do whatever they can to Alan Watts's one up each other.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem that we need to spank in our own selves, and only we can spank that. And it's hard because even when people like us are working so hard, I find myself all the time. That's all the time. And it's just
they
like,
talk about that in thought forms, like people, the esoteric ways of seeing thought forms.
And pranic healing is what we
Edward Casey's descriptions of it. You could see thought forms in
kleshas. Kleshas are basically like clouds.
And but it's the same thing. Even though that person is doing their thing, it's like they're the scorpion. The scorpion always does it's going to do what it's naturally knows until it knows something different.
Until it becomes so embarrassing.
So then
basically something else.
But that's the difference between nature and us, is they don't have that embarrassment. It just knows it needs food, right? And so it basically was the thought forms were you can influence thought forms by agreeing with what the thought form comes in, and you can be able to say, oh yeah, that, or you can just be like watching a wave or watching a boat floating through the sea. There it goes, that thought. Oh yeah, that's a thought, but you don't have to attach to it, and that's
meditation.
Part of it.
Is meditation. Basically, the more you relax, you'll notice they come up and they slowly go back down. If you would, attach to them, you're holding them up, and then they're growing roots, and then they're developing, and then the whole garden grows, and then you got to take care of the garden, and you got, oh my God. But long story short, they can come up and fall, and you're just completely there. And this is the thing is when we think that we have something good to say, long story short, I mean, what are we doing? We try to help other people by talking more. We try to lead other people by talking more. But what is that doing? That's feeding some other quality or another. But the real teaching is space for ourselves. Right. Space is only when we feel, oh my God. And so when we keep reflecting other people's situations, conversations, and thoughts, it's keeping them from realizing that that's all they're doing. And so if all we do is just keep residing in space, then there's nothing for their stuff to reflect off of, and then they're bouncing off themselves. I say that some people are just making noise because they like to confirm their existence by hearing their voice bounce off the walls and off their bodies and back again. But long story short, they're scared to realize that they don't exist. And this is the thing is that once we dive into silence and dive only into space, then not only are we quit giving food to the conversations, the concepts, the emotions, the desires, the passions, and then those fall away. And guess what? Those are not who we are. Right. It's hard for people to realize that in a real way.
It seems like it's like that whole concept is going backwards right now. Like we're not getting...
It's perpetuating those same concepts. That's what I was saying is that people are using yoga to perpetuate previous karma. Instead of transcend previous karma to create new karma.
Right.
Or eliminate it completely.
It's basically another, Sorry, go ahead. It's
basically another what? Wait, what was the last thing you said, Justin? It's basically another...
No, I said that you basically you purify your karma into positive karma, and then eventually you transcend your karma to eventually end rebirth. Because the only thing, because people want to know,
Yeah,
what
I've
was I
heard it.
doing in my previous life? And the answer is, what are you doing right now? And if you want to know what you're going to do in your next life, the answer is, what are you doing right now? So the reality is like, where are you right now is like, where is direct results of what you were just doing before. And basically what you're going to become later has everything to do with what you're doing now in contrast to what you're doing before. Did you learn your lesson? Are you still repeating it? Or are you learning the lesson and changing your actions to create new results and new life? Or are you realizing that that's all you're going to do if you keep doing all that and you want to end all that? And then there's a different path for you. But there's there's different paths of yoga, and the Buddha did a really magical thing. He in one way destroyed the evil of the caste system, but then he created the caste system in a way that is not seeing people through their actual material or family inheritance, but through the inheritance of their actual consciousness and knowledge. So he was saying, don't judge someone based off of the caste that they're laid on through material. So if you're born a Brahmin, it doesn't mean that you're Brahmin, because Brahmin is like awakened person. And a lot of these rich Brahmins are having kids, and those kids are growing up in the wealth, very ignorant. And he was basically saying, you have really stupid Brahmins now. And some of these people on the lowest caste are actually showing me more intelligence and more willingness to grow as individuals and develop themselves as beings than some of the rich kids. So how about we discern the caste system according to what he was doing was the chakras, and what chakras we were primarily living our lives out of. And so a lot of people that grow out of the higher classes were usually stuck in the first two chakras, whereas other people who grow in the lowest classes, the results of their life actually perpetuated their evolution to think in broader ways, to be more creative, and to grow in a very open way and flexible way. And so they were actually a lot easier for him to work with. And this is only basically happened because he was a king. If it was any other practitioner saying this, of course, the upper class Brahmins would be like, shut up, cut his head off. But he was the son of a king. So he had this it was like really precious chance in all time of the universe that like a Buddha just so happened to be the king's son. And so because that was the case, people listened to him, and Buddhism reigned over India after his death, 500 years after his death, for a very long time, until another Hindu yogi was like, wait a second, what he did was just refine the Vedanta teachings that we already had. So he's just teaching a refined version of Hinduism. So that's how Hinduism re-wiped the land back and took Buddhism back down to a small number again. So it's kind of all the same teachings.
Right.
And different groups are really just honing in on controlling the different concepts of those teachings. But the point of the Buddha is that he noticed people were at different levels of consciousness, and he had several schools for those different levels. And so he had the Mahayana school for the people that were on the lowest scale, but still wanted to know that what they were doing was leading towards liberation. He was basically just telling them to be mindful of themselves while they lived their lives. And then the second school was Hinayana. People were like wanting to do a little bit more than that. He was giving them a little bit more tasks. They wanted to do less work with the life. He said, well, be mindful of your breath. So they started meditating more, but not full time. And then obviously it evolved to the Vajrayana, which were the serious practitioners. These are the crazies. These are the people that like just can't be controlled, and no one knows what to do with them, have nowhere else to go. He's like, okay, you are the ones that need to dedicate all of your time to the practices and make sure that this is your last life. Because basically some people are at different stages of development than others, but when we're born into a body, we forget everything. So you could have developed yourself really highly in the previous life, but be born into one life and just have all kinds of energy. Well, Repa didn't like to be, he's a Buddhist saint from the Kagyu lineage of Vajrayana Buddhism, but he was a very successful practitioner, and he didn't like to be told that, oh, you're so successful because maybe you did such great work in a previous life. He was like, no, I'd like to think that I did all this work in this life. Some people think different ways. It doesn't really matter, but you just can't deny that there's difference between how tame some brains are than others, and how much more willing some people are ready to practice on themselves more than others. And so, like I said, Buddha gave options for other people to be more mindful, but it depended on the levels of mindfulness. If they were being it in the world through charity, through just karma yoga, or they're doing it through a mixture of the world, being more private practices, and then just living the life as if you're not a practitioner, or if you're ready to devote all of your time to just developing yourself, which includes basically months at a time doing mantra recitations and prostrations and different techniques. And the reality is that it's forcing you to basically sit longer and longer, and just allowing you to become more aware of the subtleties of your body and the subtleties of your life. There's some consciousnesses out there, brains out there, that have so many sounds, so many voices, that it's just, there's very little that you can give them that they will even want to tame. So just telling them to be mindful of what they're doing in a way that is very giving. In this way, it's kind of like, the best way for me to put it is like my family, the Christian community of the West, that is like, they are in the world and they want to do good. And so, but they don't want to leave the world either. They love their family, they love their bank account, they love all this stuff. And so they're basically mixing and worshiping of this idea of evolution, of evolving our consciousness with God, with like sharing that with a natural life. Some people say that that takes a lot longer to do because we have a lot of waves in ourselves from previous lives, and it takes a long time for those waves to calm down. And so even if we're doing all these things, it's like we think, oh, I'm still in the world, it's going to inspire others and it's going to make everyone evolve quicker. And that idea is really nice and it sounds great, but really think about how much you can inspire others by literally giving up everything and just trying to only evolve yourself now for the sake of their love and for the sake of their evolution as well. That's what the Buddha did. And there's another funny part of his story is that he left a wife and son behind. Like she just had her son. And so you would think like that looks bad.
It does, actually. Yeah.
People were like, that doesn't look like something that's inspiring to, but
what did the wife think about that? No, just kidding.
Well, this is the funny thing is that she actually ended up being the first nun that became the first female teacher. And so it took a couple of years for him to come back. But when he said, I'm going to leave and I'm not going to come back until I find what I'm looking for, which in this case was embodied evolution. Because you have to understand, like I said, there was universities of information out there already accessible. But why wasn't it working for everybody was the question. So Buddha was like another guy, similar to other people down the road that were basically asking the question, I don't want to learn the theory of yoga. I want you to teach me the experience of yoga. Do you know it? And most people didn't know it. They could talk about it every day. They could recite the mantras. They could recite all the scriptures. But whether or not they had an actual experience of what these things are talking about for themselves in their own living body was not an answer they were able to give. And so everyone was basically developing their intellectual shell, not developing any other shell. And he noticed this in a very human way. And so what he did is he did all these tantric teachings to bring himself back in the body. I mean, he hung himself, he stabbed himself, he starved himself, he did everything that you could possibly do until he finally like ended all those processes and started eating food and then balancing basically the middle road, which is a balance of austerity, practice, awareness, and just oneness with what's going on in the moment and non-resistance and not harming to that. That's when he dawned on his realization that led to what they call the enlightenment of the Buddha. But really, it's not something that is like, oh my God, he got so high that he was having 1 million orgasms at once. It was more like he was so embodied in himself that he was completely, and still is, one with every single atom in the whole entire creation. And it was not outside of himself, and it was not in some kind of trance. It was actually in this ordinary, boring moment. And he wasn't doing anything special. Because you have to understand, this is already after thousands of years of recorded practice of austerity and trying to find realization through these intense yoga practices. And he was just like, actually, I started eating food again. His main disciples abandoned him seeing him talking to a woman, eating rice that Jews feeding her. You're not supposed to look at women. You're not supposed to be eating food. They left him and abandoned him.
Yeah.
And then he ended up sitting down saying, I'm not going to go anywhere or do anything until I basically reach alignment. And that's when it dawned upon him, ding, and he was able to share it through people in his life and through his body. This is huge because this is like the opposite of what everyone's still advertising as yoga. Like I was saying in the very beginning, this is not a drug that's taking you out of your body, taking you out of this world. We're actually not trying to go anywhere else. We're actually trying to be so here. It's ridiculous and almost scary to the universe, because that's the trap, is the universe is trying to keep you so distracted that you're everywhere but here. But when you are here, it's like you scare the universe. You're like, aha. Sorry, I can talk.
No,
it's great.
Yeah. Which is a great way of like looking, as the statement is, as above, as below, and the universe is you, and the universe, you know, and that you're basically a reflection of the earth, and the earth is a reflection of you. And if we look at how often most people are really distracted by all this information, but also utilizing it as a way of entertainment, to let me get a workout in, or let me, you know, be busy. Let me get really busy. You know, I'm doing something. And it's interesting, because most of the time when you kind of look at what's being projected out of you is also a picture of you. So it's a great conversation you just said.
Really, the practices are just that. The reason people do this is because they know that whatever, this is why I say develop like 100% of attention on practices is really the best thing you can do for others. Mainly because everything that you ingest through your eyes, your ears, your mouth, what you talk about, everything is going on. That's what you're inheriting, and that's what you share. And so if you think about it, oh, that makes so much sense why they would spend all their time reciting only pure things. Because they're like filling and charging their battery with only purity. So you don't have to think, sky, there's none of that. You are emanating generosity. You know, you don't have to be like, oh, I am this, I am that, or like those qualities, you don't even need words for it, because you're emanating the quality because you've been meditating on it with your body, your speech, and your mind for days. And so this is the important thing, is that even if we're not serious practitioners, it's important for everyone to have a space where they're focusing on themselves. And whether it's through some technique or not, it's just important, because only then will you be able to, in your own way and in your own life, recognize that, yes, there's qualities. Yes, there's two different kinds, positive and negative. And then you'll notice you don't have to hold on to some, and you can hold on to others, or you'll just be holding on to some regardless. Once you come to these realizations, it's like pretty obvious, like, what do you want in your basket? You know, like only the goods, man. And so that's what it's all about, is creating the space, the environment where you have that ability. And this is hard for most people. They don't have any space in their own home where they can really rest and really focus on these things. And that's the most important thing. Really, all an altar is making sure you have a space to sit. Just you. Not anybody else, not the kids, not the daddy, not the nobody. No conversations with anybody else. And then we can work on these things. When we're working on these things, it evolves naturally. It really does. And it's really...
It's like making a date with yourself, you know, where people have been told, you know, how are you self-care? How is your self-care?
It's actually really important, but it gets thrown around a lot. But I get, you know, self-care really means, I think, what Justin is talking about, like really how you are. It's not about what you're doing as much as what you are feeling within yourself. Like, how are you feeling about yourself? How is, I mean, like, are you calm, you know?
If you sit down, you won't be able to avoid the tension.
Yeah.
It's checking in with yourself.
It will reveal itself, and you will have to acknowledge where it's coming from, why it's coming from, where it's coming from. The thing is that we're all enlightened. We just don't give ourselves enough time to realize it. And everyone's always like, you can see certain things happening, and it'll happen right in front of you and another person. And then they'll look at you and they'll literally ask you, like, So what are we going to do about that? Or what just happened? And you'll just be like, what do you mean? Like, you see what just happened. And of course, we're going to have to clean it up. Dang it. But the thing is that everyone needs that reassurance, reconfirm their own reality. It's because they're too scared to realize that they can do it themselves. And in essence, that we must. No one can enlighten us. Only we can enlighten ourselves. No one can clean our pot. No one can clean our vessel. Only we can allow it to be clean. The thing is that creating the space and the time, and then the more we accumulate space and time for that to happen, it just starts happening. Like we were saying before, it's like when you finally do nothing, paradoxically speaking, it all starts happening. And what that is the digestion of karmical experience, desires, passions. And the more space you give all those things, the more it's easy to understand what detachment really is. Because detachment obviously can't mean not being there because I'm 100% here. And it can't also mean like anything negative because you're not feeding the negative either. You're literally just watching both come and go, come and go. And this is huge because it's getting closer to realizing you're not your thoughts, you're not your passions and desires.
Right.
Yeah, I really liked Alan Watts's version of what he said, what you just said. I mean, he's like, come on now, you know who you are. Like, come on,
It's true.
you know, and no one wants to say, yeah.
It's like you're just giving yourself the space to get to know yourself better. Like you don't know yourself unless you have that space. Like you have no idea, you know?
It's scary.
And,
People give themselves so much to do. They are keeping themselves busy really, really well. And it's with conversations, it's with thought forms. And this is why it's like, even if what I was saying, if someone were to ask me, what can I do? And I would look at them, it's like, do you really want something to do? Because it would just be something else to think about to keep you from non-doing. And the thing is, I like this band, psychedelic band named Spungle, has a song called "Nothing Is Something Worth Doing," and I think that is the cutest little line.
I like that.
I'm gonna check that one out. That's cool.
It's all instrumental, but long story short, the idea of nothing is something worth doing is huge because even for good intentions, people are keeping themselves busy, and that's the one thing that's keeping them from the good intention, from realizing what is good from what is bad, and whether or not pursuing either is worth our time.
Yeah. Yes, that's a
which
really
is a lot for
statement.
a lot of people to understand. I mean,
this whole conversation is a lot.
Yeah, we're blowing people's circuits. I can just see it right now.
I have to. Well, I kind of got a reset with all that when I took this trip. But again, you don't have to take a trip to realize that. But it's like I was getting into a mode. I get into a mode of doing, and then I'm like really running myself into the ground. And then I go and I recorded a video talking about this. I haven't released it yet, but about how really like I got there and I was anxious because I didn't have anything to do. And because I had been doing this routine with the podcast and doing all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, like it took me a little bit, but finally I got into the flow and I was like, oh, this is really awesome. And then as soon as I let go, like all these things started coming to fruition. I got a few emails with some opportunities and, it just is like really, really cool. I was like, yeah, I should just do nothing more often. This feels really great. My body.
It's magic.
Amazing. It was very magical. Yeah, I have to say. And then I was like, okay, I could just do that. Like now I'm in a new, I got a reset, like I said, and I feel like I'm in a new mode right now. So I'm not pushing myself to do
things are going to happen.
So many things.
Don't you worry about that.
I know. Exactly.
Look around you.
That's
before you were born and after you die.
Oh, you're right.
The Peaceful Warrior, the book that he talks
about.
That.
I love that book.
There's always something going on.
Yes.
Always.
You don't have to do anything about it. It's going to happen. Yeah.
Chogyam Trungpa?
No, I think it's Dan.
Dan something. Yeah.
Okay.
There was a movie too.
Yeah, but in there's 3 lessons, and the one of that is there's always something going on.
Well, this is how I find mushrooms to return to nature quite effortlessly. Is that it all happens when you stop thinking I'm looking for mushrooms in the woods.
Stop
It's
looking.
That makes sense. Yeah.
basically like every time you go out with the basket, every time you go out with the ideas, you don't find anything. And
Yeah,
then
and
when you just like
it's
finally
usually
go
like
out for no reason and you have
you
nothing.
forget your basket. You don't have
You don't
anything to
have
put
a
them in. So you're
Oh,
taking
right.
off your shirt and you're
Bring a
putting
blanket, like a towel or
You
something.
know,
That's what
Wrap
happened.
it in there.
That's what happened to Bob and I. You know, we walking around at a certain park and there's chanterelles everywhere. And we're like,
you're like,
we have
we need more
nothing to
Put
space.
them in your shirt, you know.
I did.
Yeah.
I had a shirt, and we're like, you know, this is probably a
There
bad
are some
idea.
times where I've contemplated taking pants off too. And I was like, because you're like, what if
Wait, you're
someone
gonna
else
take your pants
comes?
off before you take your shirt off?
No,
No.
Yeah.
Just
I don't wear underwear. I'm doing
He's the sadhu. He
It's
doesn't
the
wear
last
anything.
resort.
Yeah, my husband doesn't. Oops, I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, so I so
Very
I have
liberating.
to, yeah, it is. I mean, I haven't gotten there yet, but
You have to breathe a little more.
We're all at a different stage of evolution.
it's true.
It's where you're breathing from, you know? You gotta get that
Yes.
system
Yes.
running.
That's so true. Okay, so I do have to go pretty soon.
Yeah, no
Is
problem.
there anything we wanted to wrap up with? Justin, do you want to also let everybody know how they can find you, or if you want anybody to find you? Or
They will find me.
It's two of them. They already have found him. That's the...
yeah.
Well, I'll be in space. It's up to you guys. So,
Right.
No, email jmic989.com, gmail.com, Facebook, Justin Michael, or Instagram, Justin Michael 622. You can look up the Instagram or the Facebook messaging me, or send an email. You can find the email on the Facebook. If you have any questions regarding yoga, fermented foods, fermented beverages, diet, nutrition, or foraging, or permaculture, or biodynamics in the garden, or biodynamics in the body. I like talking for days.
We'll have to have you back to talk about that a little bit more too.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and also if you want to take one of his classes, you can take him in Ember Yoga. He has a Sunday class that's at 3:00. It's starting to be one of my regular classes that I take, and I enjoy it, even though it's a hard class to get to from where I'm
Very
at.
hard.
But
It's in Atlanta. What
yeah,
part?
it's in Woodstock. So
Woodstock. Oh, geez.
Yeah.
You all the way out there?
Mhm.
on
Oh
a
my
Saturday
God.
afternoon.
In
Like,
Atlanta.
yeah.
A weird time and a weird place.
But
So-
it's
really
so
far.
worth it. It's so worth it. And then where else are you teaching yoga?
Well, actually, I'm not teaching yoga anywhere else. I will be starting to do workshop classes instead. So what we are doing in the Saturday classes in particular, I teach classes at 6 a.m. Embers at Ember Yoga. It's Mondays and Fridays. Those ones are generally static dynamic balance of arms, legs, and spine, strengthening and stretching with a hint of pranayama. We also add pranayamas to the sequences in the Saturday class, but the Saturday class is considered more advanced. It's a little bit longer, it's an hour and a half, and we're able to work on more parts of the body. Another thing that Andre, my teacher of Universal Yoga, noticed is that there was not asanas for the shoulders to mimic all the asanas for the hips. So there were several ranges of motion that are accessible on the shoulders that have never been developed in any system of asana, physical yoga, at least to our knowledge. So he created asanas for the shoulders. For example, virasana of the arms, lotus of the arms, opening of the arms, closing the arms in transversal planes, and then opening and closing the arms in longitudinal planes, which is like forwards, backwards versus side to side. And so basically the sequencing is a development of balancing all layers of the body and also using pranayamas. This is a second kosha, which is energetic shell, to focus on the energetics of the body. And then also I try to cue in the classes for people to close their eyes and be mindful of what's going on in their body while they're in the asanas. This is Vijnanamaya kosha, which is the next sheath up. Basically, in one class, we're affecting as many layers of our being as we possibly can. Whereas in most classes, you're generally specializing in the physical body.
And I have to say, like, we didn't even get to touch about this. Maybe when you come back on, we can talk about it. Is like how it affects the nervous system, because
Absolutely.
in the protocol, the stuff that I'm working with in Z Health, we talk about how the opposing joints affect the nervous system, affect it, and you can change a lot of things. And just to have a yoga that's really focusing on even shoulder stuff can affect your hips in so many different ways. So next show, let's definitely do something like that. We'll add in all the other stuff that we didn't talk about.
Absolutely.
And
we gotta write this down.
no, it's already written down. We just have to let it out. Let it out.
And then another thing is that just the development of different areas of our body is neurologically developing our brain. So
because you don't have this doesn't work.
And here's another really awesome thing. Reginald Ray is a really amazing man. He's a student of Chogyam Trungpa from, well, he left us, but basically he's out in Colorado and he's running what Chogyam had started, but it has changed names. It's called the Dharma Ocean now, but the way he says it is really awesome. Basically, in neuroscience and neurobiology, they're expressing that your neurological capacity is extended through the body, of course. And to develop that neurological capacity has to be through the body, obviously. But the most important thing is that if you do not develop the neurological capacity or keep it developed, it will actually be lost. And so quite easily said, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And this is why we return to the practice. This is why we return to the body.
The neural pathways are so important, and that's the mapping part that we talk about. Is like you get a blurry map, you have problems moving and problems deciphering things like vision and vestibular. And so there's this whole understanding of how to open up the map again and get your GPS working, basically to get your information coming through.
Quite literally, your sonar device as well. The spinnings in our classes, we focus on spins in space. So most yoga sequences, you're always facing one direction and you'll only turn to one side to do like transversal postures and then turn back to the center. But we do like complete 180-degree turns as long as we're working on one side, and then complete 180-degree turns to work on the other side. Developed with many sets to basically create crescendos in the body, but what the intention is with all the spins, you're affecting the Manomaya kosha, which is the mental body. And this is basically like turning the sonar device back on, because technically we're supposed to have 360 degrees of awareness spatially outside of the body as included inside the body, that is just not being used, probably because our pineal gland's been shrunk to the size of a dry pea. But that's for another conversation.
Yes, we'll leave that to that. Justin, we really appreciate your
thank you so much.
And your ability to flow and talk about anything and everything, because you are a wealth of information, and we've learned so much in this time with you. And we invite you back soon to have more of these conversations. And we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Namaste.
Nice to meet you, Justin.
Namaste. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.